Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
Teenagers also said at the same time they welcome positive portrayals of mental health on screen. It helps them understand better mental health issues. It encourages them to talk.
Inside Out, I almost feel like that should be on the national curriculum because it literally says you have feelings. Your feelings will be different. Sometimes feelings will be good. Sometimes your feelings will be bad. And that's all okay.
Films are being made these days that are quite sympathetic in their treatment of mental health, and they do encourage that conversation, and teenagers are telling us, yeah, they're great, and we do on the back of those have those really important conversations, and we think about our own mental health, so they can only be beneficial.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
Back once again with the podcast. Thank you for checking out Mental Health Monday. As ever, once again, really appreciate all your support with the show and all your sort of mentions on social media, new people joining the Mental Health Monday Facebook group. We've had a really, really busy few weeks of it, and that's no surprise given everything that's going on in people's lives, some of the high-profile conversations around mental health at the moment. There's going to be a new Minister for Mental Health as well, Gillian Keegan, taking over from Nadine Dorries. So there's a lot more conversations to have and more conversations to come here on Mental Health Monday. We, of course, have spoken openly about suicide on this programme. And again, that was a theme in last week's programme, which was also looking at film and how you represent mental health and grief on screen. It's interesting, actually, how from one leading into another leads into our next conversation, and this conversation for this week's programme with the Chief Exec of the British Board of Film Classification. And you're probably thinking, well, what's that got to do with mental health? But as you're about to hear from David Austin and Megan, who's from their youth panel, there's going to be much greater input in the future about how mental health is depicted on screen with the information more readily available to people. Now, this isn't necessarily going to be, a trigger warning before a movie gets underway. But actually, according to young people, they're much more likely to want to know what is going to be discussed in a film, and not about the levels of violence and things like that, but actually, does it depict someone's story of suicide or depression or addiction? And actually, they're looking for that information. Now, the BBFC website is a really good place to go, and their app for pretty much every movie you've ever heard of with guidance for it. Expect to see more of this on movies also when you check them out through Netflix or Amazon Prime or things like Channel 4's All 4 Hub. Guidance before it about what things are going to be represented on screen, not to put people off, but to ensure that people are aware about what they're going to see, and also to embrace a new generation of film goers who want to know this sorts of information. That they've been asked what sort of information do they want to know about before a movie, and this is exactly the sort of thing that they want to hear about. So in a few moments' time we will hear from Megan. Megan is part of the BBFC's youth panel. Now, I will say when we caught up with Megan, she was I think she just got off a boat, so the quality of the audio when we speak to Megan drops a little bit, and I apologise for that, but I wanted to leave it in because I want to make sure we hear her voice. First up though, let's say hello to the Chief Exec of the British Board of Film Classification, David Austin. There's also a little special line in here if you're a fan of the movie Inside Out. But let's say hello to David Austin from the BBFC.
Pleasure, Mick. Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I think if people said, what does the BBFC do? People would instantly think, it's about making sure that children don't see inappropriate things. So we're talking about violent things. We're talking about scary things. But what a key finding in this survey, which is out just ahead of this conversation. 8 out of 10 young people interviewed say the media industry has an important role to play in presenting mental health in a positive way. Now, is this a new endeavour for the BBFC, or is this something you've had to be aware of for some time?
It's something we've been aware of for some time, and I'll come on to some research that we did a few years ago about it. But I mean, our job is essentially to help people who want to watch films, parents, children, teenagers, have the best possible viewing experience that's suitable for them, so they can choose content that's right for them and they avoid content that's not right for them. And that's not just about sex and violence language. It does cover issues like mental health. And in 2019, when we carried out our regular guidelines research, so every 4 years we talk to 10,000 people, including teenagers, and they tell us what they think we should allow at the different age categories, U, PG, 12, 15, and so on. And when we did this most recently in 2019, we spoke to several hundred teenagers, and they said, you know what, we are concerned about issues around mental health, and we'd like you to be a bit more cautious in how you classify things that are really real to us, not sort of fantasy, your Marvel Cinematic Universe or your Star Wars, but be really careful and give us as much information as you can when you classify things that we feel could happen to us in real life, and that includes depictions of mental health. I mean, ultimately, teens said, we want to make informed decisions. We want to know before we watch something whether it's going to be right for us or not. And so BBFC, please help us. So that's what we do, and that's what we've done for many years. So part of our work is working with schools. So today we're launching a new free schools resource for GCSE students that focuses on mental health and choosing content well. And Megan and other members of our youth panel have contributed to this resource that's going into schools. And on the back of that, we want to do this piece of research about what teenagers are feeling in terms of what are the key mental health issues they think that teenagers are facing as a whole, and what impact films might have on teens in terms of how they depict mental health. And one of the findings that we came up with, and it's probably not surprising on the back of the last 18 months of COVID, is that the biggest mental health concern for teens is anxiety. I mean, it's really not surprising. It's probably the same for all of us, but teenagers have had it particularly badly. So that's kind of not surprising. And teenagers also said at the same time that they welcome positive portrayals of mental health on screen. It helps them understand better mental health issues. It encourages them to talk, to talk to their siblings, to talk to their friends, to talk to their parents. And one of the purposes of this resource that we've made available for schools is to enable teachers to have that conversation in the classroom, and then students to talk in the classroom, and then beyond the classroom in their family and their friendship groups. The other thing that we found from the research is that teenagers told us that content warnings are really important. So BBFC age ratings, along with the ratings information that we provide, which says why a film or TV show got a particular rating, are really important, particularly around depictions of mental health, in order to protect younger siblings, to protect their friends, protect themselves. Again, we come back to this point that teens want to make informed decisions, and we're there to help them.
In terms of that, and the power of the movies and things that people see on screen, I've had hundreds of conversations around mental health, and actually so many of the starting points that people have around their understanding of mental health actually comes from depictions of things they've seen in films. I'll never forget doing a talk in a school in front of hundreds of 15-year-olds who were very open to a conversation around mental health. And it was only the PE teacher afterwards who came to me and said, I've never thought about mental health like that. I always thought it was all a bit One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I thought, well, actually, if that is your starting point, and when you think about mental health, you think about the old-fashioned lunatics asylums and things like that. Many of the films that we grew up with sort of come with those old-fashioned ways of portraying that. There are much more modern ways of looking at mental health, and I know that the young people are keen to make sure that those are represented well. And actually, when they were represented well, many young people felt empowered to speak out, supported, if you like, that these things were being represented correctly on screen.
Absolutely. And there are a whole raft of really good films. I know Megan's seen quite a few of them, and I'm sure we'll be happy to talk about them, that are aimed at sometimes quite young children. You take a film like My Life as a Courgette, for instance, which we classified PG, so suitable for 8-year-olds and above. And one of the reasons we gave it that rating of PG is because it contains references to traumatic childhood experiences. It's I don't know if you've seen the film, but it's a really good animated drama about a boy who moves to a care home for young children after losing his mother. And there's a whole group of friends that develop in this home, and they all have had serious traumatic experiences as children at home, and they talk them through, and they get to understand them, and they together they overcome what difficulties they've had. So it's a really positive film aimed at a young audience that deals in a really sensitive way with mental health issues. So that's a really good example, and I know Megan's got some others. So yeah, absolutely, the films are being made these days that are quite sympathetic in their treatment of mental health, and they do encourage that conversation. And teenagers are telling us, yeah, they're great, and we do on the back of those have those really important conversations, and we think about our own mental health. so they can only be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's bring Megan into the conversation. And Megan's 18 years of age, based in Northern Ireland. Megan, 7 out of 10 people interviewed as part of the survey say that positive portrayals break down stigma and encourage young people to get help as well. What are those sort of scenes? What are those movies that stand out for you that make you think, oh, actually, this is something which is a positive step, and actually people seeing this will be encouraged to take positive steps?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. As part of one of the meetings for the BBFC, we were all tasked with watching Words on Bathroom Walls, which was a really great movie on portraying schizophrenia, which is, a lesser known mental health issue. And so that was really positive, and that was a 12. But there's so many other movies. For example, in my initial application for the BBFC, I talked about Inside Out, which is, I believe, a PG or youth rated movie, and it talks about mental health and how all the different emotions are very valid because it has different characters for joy and sadness and anger. So I think it's really important that we talk about mental health for people of all ages, and it can start at a really early age because then it kind of starts the conversation. And the BBFC has such great resources for lots of movies, like discussion points on the website. So it can launch a conversation and discussions within families and within friend groups about mental health.
Inside Out, by the way, and I'm glad you brought that up because there's another point I wanted to make on it earlier, a little bit later on. I almost feel like that should be on the national curriculum because it literally says you have feelings. Your feelings will be different. Sometimes feelings will be good. Sometimes your feelings will be bad. And that's all okay because that's all part of how your brain works and about how you develop. I literally think this might be an OTT statement and David might completely disagree. I think if that movie was made 40 or 50 years ago, and we all watched that film in the same way that we all grew up watching something like The Wizard of Oz or those sort of early Disney movies, I feel like the mental health world would be in a different place now because people would go, oh yeah, it's like the bit on Inside Out where you realize that actually being sad is part of being happy and being happy is also part of being sad. I think it's a hugely powerful thing. And I think it's a really important thing that your generation of young people will grow up as a norm. And certainly mine and David's generation before didn't grow up with those sorts of positive messages. So I'm not saying that you're lucky to be growing up in the age that we are, but those opportunities to make those positive connections are quite clearly there. Can I ask you, what do you feel is the right way to make that connection between a movie and then someone feeling empowered to say something or speak out? Should there be like a trigger warning before a film starts? Should that be in the guidance maybe when it comes up on a TV thing? How do you think we can best make those connections so people think this is a movie we'll look at stress or depression or anxiety, and I as a young person can absorb that but also know that there's a safety blanket around me that I can take steps forward afterwards?
Yeah, I think content warnings are really, really important because nowadays with like social media and YouTube, there's so little regulation that young people are exposed to things that may like trigger things in their life, emotions that they don't really want to deal with at that moment, or they might be going through specific situations that they don't want to have to watch then on YouTube, for example. And so I think that's why the BBFC or general content warnings are really important because it can also shield you in a way from something that at that point in time you might not be ready to watch, but also it's a way to kind of start a conversation. And it's just really important, I think, because there's so little regulation nowadays that it's such a great way to kind of also just, start talking, really.
Let's bring David back into the conversation. David, in terms of this, when people will look at the side of a DVD and they see phrases like mild peril, for instance, and they might go, okay, I'll make a decision, or maybe I'll watch a film first before I let my child watch it. What's a realistic way forward for these sorts of content warnings in a way that make them ultimately accessible rather than people having to really sort of deep dive online, if you like, to find these sorts of content warnings?
Yeah, well, I just answer that in a moment, but I just wanted to say, Mick, you heard it here first, that Inside Out should be on the national curriculum, and I completely agree with you. In fact, next time I'm talking to the Department for Education, I'll see if the new ministerial team will be interested in doing something on those lines. But anyway, it's enough Inside Out, but yeah, great idea, and I'll see what I can do. So yeah, in terms of ratings information, I think we provide as well as the rating for the film itself. We provide for cinema films on posters and on the back of DVD packaging. We provide a short sentence, 70 characters, as to why the film's got that rating. We will include mental health issues. So the film that Megan referred to, Words on Bathroom Walls, that has mental illness themes part of the guidance. But beyond that, more and more people, teens and families, are watching content online. So we're working with platforms like Netflix, like Amazon, like Apple, to get those content warnings and our age ratings there too. So, for instance, there's a Netflix film called To the Bone with Lily Collins, which is about anorexia and a young woman, surviving anorexia and hopefully becoming, overcoming it. And when we work with Netflix, we ensure that kind of guidance, that kind of ratings information is present. So when you go and watch this film on Netflix, you click play, and there you will have right at the outset the age rating. It's a 15, along with anorexia themes, so before you start what's in it. In addition to that, we also provide on our website and our free app more information, and this really is aimed at parents, but any user, that gives them more detail as to why a film got a particular rating. So it's just a paragraph or two, 3 or 4 sentences. So you don't need to do a deep dive in the internet. You just go to our app or our website, and you can find that information straight from the off.
Do you find like the new way that people are viewing, particularly at home, some of the content, Amazon Prime, the iPlayer, Channel 4's All 4 service, for instance, that actually the platform itself offers that opportunity, those sort of those title screens, if you like, that come before you essentially press play, offers you a new way of offering those content warnings in a way that didn't exist before, potentially in a VHS format, if you like.
Exactly. And going on to the iPlayer, I mean, obviously, the BBC takes care of its own content. We don't classify content for the iPlayer, but you'll find the same information there. But I think it's up to all of us. It's up to us as the regulator. It's up to the platforms themselves to give teenagers. I mean, I keep coming back to this. Teenagers tell us they want this information. They want to make informed decisions. So let's give them the information so they can have a great viewing experience. So it's down to us. It's down to the platforms. It's down to everyone that is involved in this space. So yeah, let's do what teenagers tell us they want and they need.
So you would expect and anticipate in the coming years that actually that mental health guidance will be much more prominent than maybe it's been before. And do you think it might be more detailed as well, as young people become much more aware of the differences between stress and anxiety and depression in a way which maybe generations before would have themed around mental health themes are included in this film, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen in the work that we do. So we've been since the 1990s, we've been going out to 10,000 people every 4 years and saying, what do you think is okay? How should we classify the different depictions of different age ratings? But also, what kind of information do you need to make a decision? So over that period, we've refined how we provide that information, the kind of information we provide, because in response to public demand. So if the public, we're the BBFC, we're the servants of the public, we do what people tell us to do. We don't make it the standard in some ivory tower in Soho Square. Teenagers and parents, the length and the breadth of the UK, Megan's from Northern Ireland, as you said, all over the UK, they tell us what they think is okay and what they need from us to make those decisions. So it's our job to continue to evolve how we provide information, what kind of information we provide, so that teenagers and families can have a great viewing experience.
Absolutely. Can I mention a slightly different theme, which came up as I think 1 in 5 brought it up as a potential issue that they wanted to see explored through film, and that was the issue around suicide. And there's been various depictions of suicide in films throughout the ages in different forms. One of the things I've noticed as a theme, and I'm aware of this now as a parent growing up, is we have a world where we talk about suicide or we don't talk about suicide. And there's a normalization, which I think is just beginning to start, but we're a long way from where we need to go. I watch, though, many films, David, where you get the noble I describe as the noble sacrifice, the suicide to save many other people. And this happens in, films like Independence Day, and it happens in another example, Star Wars, the Rogue One story. It also happens, and I'll bring it back to Inside Out. It happens with Bing Bong, the character in Inside Out, the noble sacrifice. I will take my own life, or I will sacrifice my life in the help of saving someone else. I think we've always seen that as something very positive, but do you think there's a wider issue there around saying to somebody who may have suicidal feelings that if you take your own life, then actually things will improve for people around you? At the same time, sometimes when we hear about terrible terrorist atrocities where somebody takes their own life through a suicide attack, we say, how could they possibly do that? And yet at the same time, that very weekend, we may go to the cinema and see a portrayal of somebody sacrificing themselves to take other lives in the hope of, furthering a quest or whatever it would be. And we celebrate that as a real champion of what a heroic thing to do. And I wonder whether or not there's something around there that we've not quite got our thumb on yet. And it's something that I'm well aware of now, showing films to my children. When I've got to talk about why people do the things that they do and what the consequences for those actions are. And so many of them seem to come around a suicide, which is framed as a noble sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nub of the issue that teenagers told us in 2019 between what is a realistic depiction of suicide that could happen to an ordinary teen in real life and a fantasy scenario. I mean, take Rogue One. I'm thinking of Spock sacrificing himself in Star Trek as well back in the day. These are fantasy films in war situations. They're not an everyday situation that teenagers are facing. And this comes back to teenagers telling us that kind of thing we're less worried about because it's clearly not real and it's got nothing to do with our everyday lives. But where there's a suicide in real, that's credible, that you could see happening to a teenager being involved in that, we need to be much more cautious. So let's take something like 13 Reasons Why on Netflix, a controversial series. Now there's no heroic, so this is much more realistic. It's one of the reasons we gave the film an 18 rating, because it's not the same kind of issue at all to Spock in Star Trek or the heroes in Rogue One. One of the things we do really in relation to how we classify suicide, we work very closely with the people that created the UK government's anti-suicide strategy. So we're really, really careful to to classify suicide in a really sensitive and sensible way that is not going to promote suicide as an idea. It's not going to show less well-known suicide techniques. So all our policies are worked on with the suicide prevention experts that work for the UK government and with the Samaritans. We work closely with the Samaritans on our policies and how we classify individual decisions. We work with Self-Harm UK to deal with issues of self-harm. So we talk to expert bodies to make sure that we are getting it right and we're not in realistic scenarios that teens can envisage happening to themselves, promoting the idea of suicide, quite the reverse.
Thank you for that answer. I think it's a comprehensive one, and it makes me certainly feel better as long as I keep up to date with the BBFC and the app, which has got lots of information. Megan, that sort of leads me on to my final point, really, is do you feel that maybe there's a generation of young people now who are actually quite open to seeing sort of those long-term depictions of mental health journeys on screen, whereas in the past, you would have much more broad strokes that somebody has a difficult day at work, picks up a whiskey bottle, and then suddenly they're an alcoholic. Do you think actually the young people are more open to seeing the full exploration of somebody's mental health journey, positive or negative?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Like, young people are growing up nowadays with so much conversation around mental health. And I understand that it's not something that can be fixed just by, like, lots of movies, there's easy storylines about someone maybe feeling like sad, for example, and then they fall in love and all their issues are resolved. I think people nowadays realize that not everything is just solved easily, and mental health issues are long-term and there's something that you work on over a long time. And so quick storylines where your issues or how you're feeling are fixed with just a quick fix aren't realistic, and I think young people realize that.
Excellent stuff. Will you come with me to the Department for Education when David takes a copy of Inside Out on DVD and says, "Can you show this to every child in the country?"
Gladly, yes.
Let's make it work. Absolutely. There is one other. Actually, the other film that I always think that everybody should watch, because I think it's got a true depiction of society as it is at the moment, is the film The Box Trolls, which is just it's a magical piece of cinema, but it also frames around the sort of the othering that we have of people who are a little bit different to us. And there's this brilliant, the lords on high who sit there while the town is full of problems, eating cheese, and that's all that they care about. Sometimes you do catch these sort of moments within animated films aimed at children, which capture something which, as an adult, you think, "Oh, yeah, absolutely. This would be a Dostoevsky, novel in the past. Now it is presented in 90 minutes." But that's the magic of cinema, isn't it? And that's part of the art.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at Toy Story 3. When the characters, you think of facing impending doom, and the impact that had on adults as well as children. The best children's films appeal absolutely to adults as well. Cinema is great, and it's just I can't tell you, changing the subject slightly, I can't tell you how happy I am that cinemas are now reopened and that we're starting to see some great films coming through. We've got Bond next week, and we've got a whole raft of films after that are, and I'm lucky to have seen quite a few of them already as part of the classification process. We've got a real treat, I think, for cinema goers in store for the rest of 2021.
I was going to ask you about Bond, of course, David. I can't not ask you about Bond. Can I ask you, because we've had so many false starts on the Bond film, have you reclassified it each time it's had a sort of a prepared launch? Has anything changed in that time, or have you got the first version that you saw that your classifications sit across? Has it changed at all?
Yeah, I don't know if I can tell you much about Bond, but I can tell you that it's coming out on the 30th. It's great, and I'm going to go and see it again because I enjoyed it so much when it came through the building.
When it finally hits our cinema screens. Thank you so much for your time today. If people want to find out more information about the research, the British Board of Film Classification website's got information. You mentioned the app as well, David, and it's a really useful tool, isn't it, for people just to have on standby for pretty much anything that they want to catch on their particularly home viewing.
Exactly, and also when you're in the queue in the multiplex, which film should we go and see? Okay, let's have a quick look at the app to see what's most suitable for us as a family. So yeah, absolutely, home viewing and viewing in the cinema.
David Austin, Chief Executive of the British Board of Film Classification. Megan, as well, thank you for your time too, your top tips and recommendations. Inside Out on the national curriculum, I think that's what we'll take away as well from the conversation too. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us on the programme.
Thank you, Mick. It was a pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.